There was music playing, something upbeat and fake happy, like a curated playlist made by someone trying too hard to prove their life was perfect. And then the room fell quiet. I didn't have to scan the crowd. I already knew where she was. She always stood near the bar at gatherings like this, sipping something fruity while pretending not to watch who was watching her. But she was watching now. Watching me. With her jaw slightly open, her glass halfway to her lips, and her other hand still resting on his chest. Right on his chest. Next to me stood the woman whose world had been shredded a few hours earlier by a string of text messages I didn't even want to see until she begged me to read them. The woman whose husband was now standing across the room with mine. Technically, he wasn't holding Laurel, not the way you'd hold someone in public if you were proud of them. No. It was subtle. That sort of proximity that looks innocent if you're not paying attention. But we were paying attention. And they knew it. That was the moment everything stopped. Not literally, people kept moving, drinks clinked, someone coughed, but the energy shifted like someone had unplugged the night. Nobody knew what to say. Not Laurel. Not her secret boyfriend. Not the dozen or so friends, acquaintances, and uninvited spectators caught in the blast radius of something quietly devastating. Laurel looked like she was trying to compute a dozen things at once. Why was I here? How did I know? Who was this woman with me? What exactly had we come to do? I didn't say anything. Neither did Isla. We didn't need to. The silence was speaking louder than any confrontation ever could. Let me rewind, not all the way, just to earlier that day. At 11:14 a.m., I was still under the impression I was a boring husband with a boring marriage and a wife who just needed a little more space. By 11:38 a.m., I was staring at a phone Isla had handed me, reading things that made my face flush hot and my legs go numb. They called each other names like My Hidden Joy and Yoga Sen. They had plans for this weekend, that night, and they were both excited to see each other in real clothes for once. Apparently, most of their time together had been spent half-dressed in the backseat of his truck or in hotel rooms she paid for in cash. There was a photo, too. One I'll never unsee. Laurel had taken it in our guest bathroom, the same one her mom uses when she visits. I recognized the shower curtain. I bought that stupid shower curtain. I wanted to break something. But Isla just sat there across from me, a hand on her forehead, breathing like someone trying not to break in public. We didn't talk much. There wasn't a need for discussion, just a sort of heavy understanding that something unspeakable had been growing right under both of our noses. She said she'd found my email from a shipping confirmation Laurel had forwarded months ago by mistake. That's how she knew who I was. I should have said no. I should have gone home, cried into a sandwich, and let it rot me slowly like I usually do. But instead, I said yes. Yes to walking into that party. Yes to letting them see the fallout. Yes to not hiding for once. So there we were. And she saw us. Laurel started walking toward me, but her feet betrayed her small, hesitant steps, like the floor might collapse if she moved too fast. Dale, she said, her voice sugar-coated with panic. What are you? Isla cut her off. Calmly. Sharply. We thought we'd stop by. You know. Since we weren't invited to our own betrayal. Every eye in the room turned. Laurel froze. Jordan, her lover, didn't say a word. He looked like someone who just realized the parachute wasn't packed right. Still, I said nothing. Because I knew what came next, and it wasn't going to be gentle. I didn't expect to feel powerful. I didn't expect to feel anything. Really, maybe some twisted sense of revenge, maybe nothing at all. But standing there in that room full of fake smiles and even faker friends, all I felt was weight. A physical heaviness in my chest that made it hard to breathe. Like I had become the embarrassment. Like I was the punchline walking around with a heartbeat. Laurel stood in front of me now. Her voice barely rose above the music, which someone had awkwardly paused the second we walked in, like even Spotify couldn't bear to witness what was coming next. She blinked too much. Her lips parted a few times like she was about to explain the weather instead of this. Dale, listen, I can. No, I said, and I barely recognized my own voice. It wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. It was just flat. Hollow. Like my insides were packing their bags. You weren't supposed to be here, she said quickly, then immediately winced at her own words. Oh, I said. I'm sorry. I guess I missed the part where betrayal came with a guest list. Jordan, the other half of this car crash, still hadn't moved. His hand was hanging midair like he was unsure whether to reach for Laurel or scratch his own neck. He looked like a substitute teacher caught hitting on a student. Guilty, sweaty, stupid. Isla stepped forward, calm as ever, but I could see the way her hand was shaking against her thigh. Her nails had dug tiny red crescents into her palm. You texted him, "Can't wait to taste your lies again tonight." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were fire. Was that a typo? Were you hoping for something more poetic? Laurel's face crumbled. She wasn't ready for that. She wasn't ready for any of this. She opened her mouth, but I wasn't done. Not yet. You invited him here, I said. To a party full of people who've known me and you for years. Did you think no one would notice? Or were you just betting on the fact that I've been quiet my entire life? She tried to reach for me then. I actually flinched back, like her touch might stain me worse than the truth already had. I caught the flicker in her expression, a mix of shame and annoyance. Like I was being difficult. I didn't mean for it to get serious, she whispered, low and fast. It was supposed to be a phase, Dale. Just something to feel alive again. That word. Alive. God, it rang in my ears like a cruel joke. I'd been here, trying to keep everything together, trying to be enough, and she was out there craving aliveness with someone else's husband in hotel bathrooms? Someone let out a nervous laugh in the back of the room. Just a small exhale with a sound, like they couldn't believe this wasn't a scene from some trashy drama. A couple nearby shifted awkwardly, and someone actually reached for chips like this was halftime at a game. And then I said it. The thing I hadn't planned. The thing that just fell out of my mouth like I had no control anymore. I brought the divorce papers. They're in my car. Signed. Dated. You just have to add your signature. But I figured maybe you'd want to finish the party first. Who knows? Maybe dessert's betrayal flavored. The silence after that wasn't quiet. It roared. People looked away. A woman gasped. Jordan finally opened his mouth like he was about to defend himself, but Isla beat him to it. And you, she said, spinning on him with a calm so sharp it could slice glass, are going to explain to our children why their dad didn't come home tonight. He blanched. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Good. Let him choke on it. I didn't wait for the scene to play out. I didn't want to be there when the aftershocks hit. I turned, grabbed the door handle, and nodded for Isla to follow if she wanted to. The last thing I saw was Laurel, eyes wide, mouth trembling, frozen in a life she just realized she couldn't control anymore. We walked outside into the cold air, which hit harder than expected. The kind of air that tells you you're really, truly awake. Isla didn't say anything at first. We stood there next to my car in silence, both of us shaking for completely different reasons. I wanted to cry. Again. But I didn't. Not yet. You really had the papers already? She asked softly. I nodded. How long have you known? About 12 hours. She whistled. That's fast. Not fast enough, I said. Not after everything. She looked up at the sky then. Stars were just barely starting to peek through. I feel like throwing up. Me too, I said. We didn't hug. We didn't have a moment. We just stood there, two people bleeding from the same wound, too numb to notice the mess. And somewhere behind us, the party kept going because that's what people do. They pretend nothing happened, even when everything did. The next morning started like any other, except that everything was different. My alarm went off at 7:10, but I had already been awake for 2 hours, staring at the ceiling in a house that no longer felt like home. The silence was louder now, the kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it squeezes it, presses down on your ribs like grief in physical form. I didn't even get up right away. I just lay there thinking about how strange it is that you can share a bed with someone for years, but once they lie to you the right way, or maybe the wrong way, that bed turns into a crime scene. I got up eventually, walked past the photos we still had on the wall. Our wedding. A trip to Asheville. That forced smile vacation we took to Arizona when we both pretended nothing was wrong. Laurel looked beautiful in all of them. She always did. That was part of the problem, I think. She was too magnetic. People were drawn to her. I was just one of many who mistook the pull of her charm for gravity. There were already texts on my phone. From her. From people who were at the party. From one of her friends, Mallory, I think, asking if everything was okay between us. As if what happened could be categorized as not okay. As if there was a scale for betrayal and I'd simply hovered too close to the red zone. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I checked my email, not out of curiosity, but because I still had a job, and the world hadn't stopped spinning just because mine had. There was an inbox full of invoices, spreadsheets, and some passive-aggressive message from my boss about deadlines. I stared at it blankly, like I was reading a foreign language. Then the knock came. It wasn't loud. Just a gentle tap, once, then twice. I didn't have to guess. I opened the door, and there she was. Laurel. Still in the same heels from last night, her makeup smudged just enough to look human again. She was holding a tote bag like she was delivering groceries instead of regret. I didn't sleep, she said. I said nothing. Can I come in? I stepped aside, not because I wanted her inside, but because I didn't know what else to do. Old habits die hardest when you're still clinging to pieces of the person who hurt you. She walked past me and into the living room like she hadn't just publicly humiliated both of us. I don't know where to start, she said, finally sitting on the edge of the couch like it was someone else's furniture. Last night, that wasn't supposed to happen like that. Was it supposed to happen at all? I asked. The words came out before I could filter them. She looked at me, and there it was, that twist in her face that said she didn't like how the conversation was going. Like she expected me to be gentler. Maybe even comfort her. I almost laughed. I wasn't trying to destroy us, she whispered. But you did. I just needed something that wasn't routine, she said. I was dropping to her lap. You don't see it, Dale, but everything became so small with us. Same coffee, same show, same arguments, same silence. And sleeping with someone else fixed that? I said, my voice sharper now. Was that the adrenaline rush you were looking for? The cure for oat milk and reruns? She didn't answer right away. She just sat there, pressing her palms together like she was praying, or maybe begging herself not to cry. You were always so nice, she finally said. You never fought. You never yelled. I thought maybe you didn't care. That one hit different. I actually had to sit down. So what? Being decent made me invisible? I'm not saying it's fair, she murmured. No, I snapped. You're not saying much of anything that makes sense. She stood up, pacing now. Look, I know what I did. I know I broke something. But I still love you, Dale. I do. And I think we could work through this, maybe with someone to help us. I made a mistake. It doesn't have to end everything. My laugh surprised even me. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. This was a sustained project. You're not perfect either, she blurted out, her tone suddenly colder. You shut down. You disappear inside your head. Sometimes you feel more like a roommate than a husband. There it was. The defensive pivot. The reframe. The part where the knife goes in and twists. It always shows up once the guilt gets too heavy to carry alone. I was busy holding everything together while you were off playing fantasy life with someone else, I said. You don't get to pin this on my quiet. She was crying now. Not loud, not for effect, real tears, I think. But I couldn't bring myself to care. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Before she left, she said one more thing. People are going to talk, Dale. They already are. She was right. By the end of that day, 3 people had called me. One of them was my cousin. One was our neighbor, who said she saw Laurel getting into a pickup truck more than once this month when I wasn't home. And one was Jordan's brother, who, in a twist I hadn't seen coming, said, I've been waiting for this to come out. I didn't know how to tell you. Apparently, everyone had seen pieces of it. Except me. If you'd asked me before all this whether Laurel was the kind of person who could lie to my face and sleep beside me afterward, I would have told you no. She wasn't built that way. She was too expressive, too fiery, too honest. At least, that's what I used to believe. That belief died quietly in my throat around midnight last night, the moment I realized I'd spent more than a decade sleeping beside someone who was good at pretending. And I don't just mean pretending to love me. I mean pretending to be someone else entirely. I didn't go into work the next day. I sent an email saying I was dealing with a personal emergency, and for once, I didn't care how that sounded. I sat on the back porch in my old hoodie, drinking reheated coffee and staring at the trees like they had answers. But of course, they didn't. They just stood there swaying like nothing had changed. My phone buzzed. I didn't want to look, but I did. It was Isla. She had sent one message. Just a photo. I opened it, expecting another screenshot of messages or some post-party fallout. But no, it was a picture of Laurel and Jordan, taken from a distance. They weren't touching, but they were seated closely on what looked like a bench outside some cafe. The timestamp was from last month. It wasn't even a secret photo. It was one Laurel had posted herself, cropped tightly to only show her latte and a book. But in the full version Isla had somehow found, Jordan was sitting right next to her, clearly visible. They'd been hiding in plain sight. I stared at the image for a long time, then texted Isla back. How long have you known? Her reply came seconds later. Longer than I admitted. I was hoping it would stop. It didn't. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to be angry at her for not warning me sooner. Part of me understood exactly why she didn't. Because there's something impossibly humiliating about being the only one in the room who still believes a lie. She had tried to believe her version of Jordan wasn't capable of this, just like I tried to believe Laurel still needed me. And yet, it wasn't even the worst thing I learned that day. Around 3 in the afternoon, I went into the attic to grab an old shoebox of receipts and financial files, the ones we kept from back when we did our taxes jointly. I don't know what exactly I was looking for, but something told me to look. A hunch. A knot in my gut. That's when I saw the folder. Not hidden. Just buried. It was labeled Carson. Now, that name hit me hard. Carson was the name of a client Laurel used to train in private yoga sessions. She mentioned him in passing maybe 3 times over 2 years. Always casual. Always forgettable. But I opened the folder anyway. Inside were letters. Emails printed out. Notes. The kind people don't send anymore unless they're desperate to keep something hidden. One in particular had Laurel's handwriting across the top in red pen. Burn after reading. Of course she hadn't. The letter was dated 3 years ago. It was addressed to Carson. The language wasn't subtle. I wish I could say I regret what we did, but I don't. That night in Louisville changed everything for me. I think about it more than I should. If I had met you before, Dale, maybe we wouldn't be sneaking around. But maybe the sneaking is what makes it so alive. I sat down on the attic floor, covered in insulation dust, staring at that piece of paper like it might grow claws and attack me. 3 years ago. 3 entire years ago. I had no idea she had done this before. I thought Jordan was the first. I thought this betrayal was a one-time collapse. It wasn't. It was a pattern. And the worst part? She chose to stay. She had been unfaithful, then crawled back into our life like nothing had happened, cooked dinner, laughed at sitcoms, held my hand at funerals. All of it on the heels of this other man, this other life. By the time I got back downstairs, I was shaking. Not just emotionally, physically. I had to sit on the kitchen floor for 10 minutes just to slow my breathing. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a history I'd never known I was a bystander in. I didn't even know who to call. Isla? No. This wasn't her mess. My cousin? Too messy. My boss? God, no. Instead, I did something pathetic. I opened a blank Word document on my computer and started writing a letter. Not to her. To myself. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that I was still real. That I had thoughts that belonged only to me. That I hadn't been erased by years of being the background character in someone else's secret story. I wrote, "You didn't deserve this. Even if you were boring, even if you were quiet, even if you never learned how to make the kind of small talk that fills rooms with sound instead of dread, you didn't deserve this." Then I saved it. Didn't even print it. Just saved it with the name for the day you forget. By evening, Laurel still hadn't come back. And that was the first time that felt like a gift. I should have known the silence wouldn't last. It never does with people like Laurel. They don't let things settle. They don't let the wreckage breathe. They scramble to patch the holes before the dust even hits the ground. So when I heard the front door open just after 9 p.m., I didn't jump. I didn't stand. I didn't even look away from the muted television screen I'd been staring at for an hour. I just waited. The scent hit me before her footsteps did. Lilies. My least favorite. She knows that. Too strong. Too fake. But there they were anyway, clutched in her arms like an apology that bloomed in a vase instead of her chest. She came into the living room like a guest. Like she was visiting someone she used to know but didn't want to disturb. "I brought these," she said, as if I hadn't noticed. She didn't set them down. She just stood there holding them like a prop, her hands gripping the stems too tight. I finally turned to face her. No makeup this time. Just raw, unfiltered Laurel, the version I hadn't seen in months, or maybe years. She looked tired. Not just physically. Deeply. Like her soul had finally caught up with the lies her mouth had been sprinting ahead of. "I read it," I said quietly. "The letter to Carson." She flinched. The flowers shook slightly. "I didn't know that was still up there." "Of course you didn't," I replied. "That would have required remembering what you did." She sat down then, carefully, like the couch might reject her. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just looked at me with this expression I didn't recognize, something between shame and calculation. "I was going to tell you about Carson," she said, barely above a whisper. "But you had just started therapy. You were in such a fragile place back then. I thought it would break you." I let out a laugh that surprised even me. "You thought not telling me that you cheated would be kind?" "You were already so closed off, Dale," she said, louder now. "I didn't want to destroy what little was left of you. So instead, you just kept using me while you pretended to be someone else?" She looked away. That was her answer. I stood up, slowly, Because my knees weren't cooperating. I'd been sitting too long, stewing in everything she'd dumped into our lives. You know what's funny? I said. You always talked about how I disappeared into routine, that I was boring, predictable. But you? You're just chaotic enough to convince yourself that destruction makes you interesting. She flinched again. I think that one hurt. Good. Then, almost as an afterthought, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I didn't move. She walked it over and placed it on the coffee table like it was radioactive. What's that? I asked. Something I wrote. After the party. Oh, good. A letter. Another one. I rolled my eyes. Do I get to find this one in the attic in 3 years, or is it safe to read now? She didn't reply. Just stood there awkwardly before finally placing the flowers in the kitchen sink, like even she knew they didn't belong on display. I'm staying at Erin's for a few nights, she said. Erin knows. She does now. That stung more than it should have. Because Erin was her best friend. And Erin had been at our wedding. Erin had sent us a baby shower card when we miscarried, even though we told almost no one. Erin had shared wine with me at our New Year's parties and called me her second brother. And Erin knew. I nodded slowly, like I could somehow process betrayal in list form. Before she left, Laurel turned one last time and said, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just didn't want this to end without you knowing I still don't. I cut in. Don't say you love me. You don't get to love me in the same breath you've been lying. And then she was gone. I didn't touch the envelope for hours. I stared at it while an old sitcom played in the background, the laugh track hitting at all the wrong moments, mocking me with its artificial comfort. When I finally opened it, I found 2 pages. Not handwritten. Typed. Laurel couldn't even bleed the apology out of her own pen. The letter started with, You were always the safest place I had, and I took that for granted. It got worse from there. She wrote about boredom, about confusion, about needing more, like marriage was a subscription that didn't renew often enough. She didn't say she wanted me back. She didn't say she didn't. It was a letter filled with guilt, but no direction. A confession without consequence. And somewhere in the middle of it, she wrote, I never felt seen by you the way I felt seen by them. Them. Plural. I closed the letter and set it down next to the remote. The word them echoed through my head like a bell. It confirmed what I had already begun to suspect. Jordan and Carson weren't the only ones. This wasn't a one-time thing. Or even 2. It was a lifestyle she kept behind my back, dressed in new names and different lies. I didn't sleep that night. Not even for a second. Instead, I sat at the table, alone, rereading that letter while my mind played back every dinner we shared, every I love you that now sounded like a punchline. And I wondered how much of my life had been lived inside someone else's story. The next few days felt like moving through wet concrete. Nothing made sense in the right order. The hours bled into one another without shape. I ate toast I couldn't taste. I answered work emails with the numb precision of someone pretending to care. I folded laundry that wasn't mine, stared too long at an empty corner in the closet where her things used to hang. And every time the front door creaked, every time the floor settled unexpectedly, I'd feel that familiar knot in my gut, the one that said, she's back. Even when she wasn't. It wasn't peace. It was just quieter chaos. I hadn't responded to her letter. I didn't know how. There was no proper etiquette for answering a written confession of serial emotional arson. I didn't even know what I'd say if I tried. What's the correct response to, I cheated on you with more than one person because I felt invisible? Do you offer condolences? Advice? A refund? I didn't talk to anyone about it. Not really. Isla sent me a message 2 days after Laurel left. It was brief. Just checking in. Hope you're breathing. I responded with barely, and that was the end of that conversation. We were both too tired to become each other's support systems. She had kids to protect. I had my own shattered silence to keep company. Then, on a random Thursday evening while I was heating up leftover pasta and trying not to think about anything, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Laurel on the porch, not in tears, not looking disheveled or apologetic, but calm, focused, wearing the same green coat I bought her for our 7th anniversary. That coat had once been the reason she kissed me in the middle of a snowy parking lot. Now it looked like a costume, a trick. Before I could say anything, she held up a manila envelope. I need to show you something, she said. I'm not reading another letter, I muttered, already stepping back. It's not a letter, she replied. I didn't invite her in. I just stood in the doorway as she opened the envelope and pulled out a single photo. She handed it to me. It was old. At least 7 or 8 years ago. We were at a beach, Myrtle Beach, maybe? I had sunburn on my neck, and she had her feet in the water. Someone must have snapped it without us knowing. But there was something strange about it. Not the setting, not us, but a man in the background. Someone I didn't recognize. He's the reason this started, she said. I looked closer. A tall guy, sunglasses, standing near the dunes with a surfboard under his arm, smiling at something. Or someone. What am I looking at? I asked, the confusion leaking into my voice. His name is Bryce. You wouldn't remember him. He was at the same resort. We talked once at the pool bar when you were napping. That's all it was. You cheated on me with him? No, she said. But I wanted to. That's when I knew something in me had changed. I didn't do it then, but I could have. And that scared me. I stared at her. She was calm. Too calm. Like she had rehearsed this speech in the mirror a dozen times and was just now getting it right. So why are you telling me this? I asked. She hesitated, then looked away for the first time since arriving. Because I think you need to know this didn't start with Jordan. Or Carson. Or whoever else you've discovered by now. Whoever else. The words hit like glass in my mouth. This started with me feeling like a ghost in my own body. Like no matter what I did, I was either someone's reflection or someone's responsibility. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because the twisted part, the truly maddening part, was that I understood what she meant. I'd felt invisible too. Just in a different way. Mine had made me smaller, quieter. Hers had made her reckless. She handed me the photo and turned to leave. But before she reached the steps, she paused and said without turning around, "You're going to find out something soon. I just wanted you to hear it from me first. Sort of." I called after her, "What are you talking about?" But she didn't answer. She got into her car and drove off. And I just stood there, holding a picture of myself from a life I barely remembered, next to a woman who had already left me twice. It didn't hit me until later that night, while brushing my teeth, that she hadn't come back to apologize. She had come back to warn me. About what? I didn't know yet. But it was coming. The next morning, I kept replaying her words. "You're going to find out something soon." It was a vague threat disguised as closure. The kind of sentence you tuck into someone's brain, so it gnaws at them like a splinter. And it worked. I couldn't concentrate on anything, not emails, not food, not even music. Every song on shuffle felt too artificial, too upbeat, too dishonest. Like the world hadn't gotten the memo that something deeply wrong had been set in motion. By the afternoon, I gave up trying to act functional. I sat at the kitchen table, the photo of Myrtle Beach still lying in front of me. The edges were starting to curl. I hated how happy I looked in it, how clueless. I could have stared at that image forever if it weren't for the knock on the door. It wasn't Laurel. It was a woman I had never met. She was in her mid-30s, professionally dressed but clearly nervous. She introduced herself as Kimber Doss, and when I looked confused, she handed me a folded piece of paper with my name written in Laurel's handwriting across the top. Her hands trembled. "She asked me to give this to you," Kimber said, not meeting my eyes. She didn't want to send it by mail. I asked her who she was. She hesitated. "We worked together. A long time ago. At a center for restorative therapy." I didn't even know she was married. There it was. The pause. The implication. The unspoken. I opened the letter right there in front of her. Laurel's familiar typing again, like she was writing job cover letters to explain her collapse. But this one didn't start with "Dear Dale." It started with, "I can't control what Kimber tells you. But if you've met her, then you know the version of me I tried to bury." Kimber watched me as I read. No shame. No bitterness. Just a solemn kind of pity. When I asked her what this was really about, she exhaled like she'd been holding it for hours. She and I were both in a group that focused on boundary repair and emotional entanglement, Kimber said. We weren't supposed to get involved with anyone from outside the circle during that time. Especially not facilitators. Facilitators? I asked, my voice colder than I expected. She had a relationship with one of the licensed counselors. The words slid in too easily, like my brain had made space for them without asking me first. I read further into the letter. Laurel described how, after the Carson thing, she joined a specialized therapy group, not just for infidelity recovery, but for people who blur the lines between attachment and escape, and that she had relapsed. That's the word she used. Relapsed. Like cheating was a substance she couldn't resist. In the letter, she named him Miles Dean, a man I had never heard of, someone who was supposed to help her heal and ended up becoming another name on the list. But what froze me wasn't the affair. It was the timeline. It had happened before Jordan, after Carson. A full year where she told me she was in recovery, going to therapy, working through the root of her restlessness. And all that time, she was spiraling deeper. And worse, she was telling herself it was part of her healing. Kimber seemed to understand what I was feeling. Or maybe she'd seen it before, the way a person folds when they realize their past is even more corrupted than they thought. I asked her why she agreed to bring this to me. She said she owed you the truth, Kimber replied. But I think she just didn't have the nerve to deliver it herself. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat on the bathroom floor with the fan on, something I used to do back in college when my anxiety was too loud. I reread the letter 3 more times. I Googled Miles Dean. He was no longer practicing. His license had been suspended 2 years ago due to an inappropriate personal relationship with a client, my wife. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was pathology. It was a string of lies so tangled I didn't know where the real Laurel ended and the artificial one began. The next day, Isla called. It was the first time we'd spoken voice to voice since the party. Her tone was flat, tired, and, strangely, relieved. Jordan's moving out, she said. Finally. And I thought you should know. There's more. My heart dropped. I asked, more what? He had pictures, she said, of her. From months ago. Way before the party. They weren't just random hookups. They were planning something. What kind of something? I think they were going to leave you and me. Together. It was too much. I almost dropped the phone. She continued. They had a private group chat. Not just for messages. There were voice notes. She talked about you, Dale. A lot. I could barely whisper. What did she say? That you were harmless. That you wouldn't fight back. That you'd just vanish. Vanish. That word repeated in my head all night. I realized then, it wasn't just that she had betrayed me. She had erased me in her mind, before she even left. And somehow, that hurt more than anything else. I didn't answer Laurel's text for the next 3 days. I didn't open the messages she left on the voicemail either, 7 of them, all somewhere between desperate and rehearsed. I figured if someone really wants to change, they'll stop trying to narrate their apology and start living it without a script. And me? I did something small. Something so tiny it barely registered as progress. But for me, it was everything. I packed a weekend bag and left the house. Not in a dramatic, suitcase thrown into the trunk kind of way. Quietly. Deliberately. I drove to a cabin 3 hours out, the kind that had no TV, barely any cell reception, and a porch that creaked with every step like it was sighing with you. The first night I got there, I didn't do much, just stood outside watching trees sway and tried to remember what it felt like to have my own thoughts without second-guessing them. By the second morning, I deleted every photo of Laurel from my phone. That was harder than I expected. Not because I missed her, I didn't. But because I was terrified that erasing her meant accepting that the years we spent together were nothing more than a well-decorated lie. And I needed to believe, even for my own dignity, that somewhere in that mess, I was still real. That same day, I found a notebook under the cabin's tiny coffee table. Blank, except for the first page where someone had scribbled. This page doesn't care what happened. Just start. I smiled. Maybe the universe did have a dry sense of humor. So I wrote. For hours. Not about her. About me. About the parts of myself I'd ignored while trying to be someone else's anchor. About the quiet things I loved and the boring routines I used to resent, but now missed because they were mine. I wrote about the time I learned to drive a stick shift with my uncle and cried when I stalled on a hill. I wrote about my dad teaching me how to grill and how I still can't get the timing right on medium rare. I wrote about how I used to stay up until 2 a.m. just to organize my bookshelf alphabetically, and how no one ever knew because it felt too nerdy to admit. For the first time in a long time, I liked who I saw on the page. And that's when it really clicked. She didn't break me. She just stopped seeing me. And maybe, just maybe, I had stopped seeing myself too. When I got back home 2 days later, the house felt different. Still quiet. Still missing her presence, but not in the way it hurt. More like a room that's been freshly aired out. There were traces of her still there. A jacket hanging on the back of a chair, one of her mugs on the windowsill, the kind of tiny shadows people leave behind when they don't know they've already gone. I put everything she left into a box. No tears. No ceremony. Just one box, one tape seal, and a note that simply said, "Take care of yourself." That night, I made myself dinner. Not out of spite, not out of some need to prove anything. I made it because I was hungry and I remembered that cooking, even badly, was something I liked before everything became about us. I played the old playlist I used to listen to while balancing the budget spreadsheets she always teased me about. And I didn't cry. Not once. A few weeks later, Isla texted me. Just a photo. Her and her kids, smiling on a hiking trail, all flushed and sun-kissed. Her caption read, "You don't disappear, Dale. You just show up somewhere better." I saved the photo. Not because I needed it, but because I liked the reminder. I still get the occasional text from Laurel. Some are long. Some are just thinking of you messages. I haven't responded. I probably never will. Not out of hatred. Not even out of pride. Just because I've realized something she probably never will. I was never boring. I was never invisible. I was just quiet. And she mistook that for weakness. Now I know better. And better is where I'm going.